Diplomatic security, or I'll probably use DS most of the time, is the security and law enforcement arm of the Department of State. We have a variety of missions: physical security, technical security, procedural security, cyber security. We do criminal investigations in terms of making sure that the integrity of our passport and visa fraud issuance process is not abridged. And I think the most important task is certainly that our job is to enable the Foreign Service to conduct its work overseas, often in increasingly dangerous and unstable places, with the right level of security so that we get Foreign Service officers can do their job and yet feel safe and secure doing it. Well, we have a cadre of security officers overseas at an embassy. They're called regional security officers. We have 163 embassies and, we have 285 facilities around the world. 275 are embassies or consulates, or consulate generals. And we have security officers and security programs at all of them. We have security officers at the vast majority of them. And they run the security programs for our personnel overseas. We have a very long-standing and fruitful relationship with the U.S. Marine Corps. After World War II, we worked with the Marine Corps to start a program where they provide Marines that are what we call Marine security guards at our embassies. They're the 24-hour presence at our embassies and many of our consulates that allow us to ensure the protection of it 24 hours a day. Operationally, they answer directly to the RSO, who answers to the ambassador for security operations. It's one of the few units in the military, actually I'm not aware of any others, that take direct operational orders from a civilian, in this case the security officer. They are administratively responsible back to the Marine Corps, so they have a split line of responsibility, and the Marine Corps takes great care of them overseas. We strive to as well. But it's really one team overseas. It's composed for an embassy. Our security platform is really our security officers, our Marines, in many cases security engineering officers. We have local guard programs, we have bodyguard programs, we work with the host country police and security services. And that envelope that we create, appropriate for what the threat environment is in the country, is how we address security. The security programs are aimed at the Foreign Service officers and our families, all of our people, and our local employees as well. We have different types of security programs for all, but we have things like residential security programs where we look at every single residence that we're about to lease. We make recommendations whether it's in the right location, whether it needs to be upgraded with security features on it. These are the types of things that help us keep our families safe. We have training programs for our employees and our families in terms of security. We do security briefings when they arrive at post to give them the lay of the land and what they should do and should not be doing at a post. We have communications devices for them there. We have warden systems. Before our families and employees leave the United States, we give them training and we train them beforehand. So it's a comprehensive program that really addresses almost every type of security need that the department has. In every country, it's slightly different because the threats and the things that we face in every country are different. In many places that are our most dangerous, we have very large programs, and we may be with our Foreign Service officers every minute that they're outside of an embassy. In many places around the world, we don't have to have that type of security. There may be a protective detail for the ambassador as the symbol of the United States, but for very few others. If the threat goes up, then we adjust and add more people to it. So there is no one answer for security at any of our posts around the world. It's threat-driven. We've had very few threats against our families, really. It's more ensuring that when they're out in the normal environment, that they don't get into the wrong neighborhoods, or they know what to do if they run into a demonstration. We've actually been very fortunate and had very few threats against family members. Well, in the most extreme cases, we don't have family members at our posts overseas. We have a variety of tools at our disposal depending on what's occurring in the country, whether there's a high degree of instability or whether there's actual threats. And we go from posts that are fully accompanied, which means you've got the employees and the full family members, including children in school. We've got certain posts where we just have the employees and working adult family members. No children. We have certain posts where we have employees and working adult family members, and sometimes children under 5 years old that are not going to school, so they don't have to get on school buses that are timed every single day. And we have many places, unfortunately a growing number in some cases, of posts where we can have only the officers and we don't have any family members, and those are our hardest and most difficult posts. We review every single post that we have every single year for a variety of different types of threats, whether it's civil disorder, whether it's terrorism, whether it's crime. We look at it and we literally put ratings on every one of our posts. That gives you a general idea of the environment that the post is operating in. The decisions on whether we're going to be a post that has families or doesn't have families starts with the Emergency Action Committee at the post. They assess the security situation, and usually the ambassador to the DCM, Deputy Chief of Mission, leads that committee. We have representatives on that committee, including the RSO and the political officer, consular officers, members of other U.S. government agencies that are at the embassies or the consulates. And this Emergency Action Committee will actually look at what's happening, and our normal stance is with families, but they may make a recommendation that things are too unsteady, things are too unstable, and they may make a recommendation that we move our dependents out. Once they make that recommendation, it comes back to Washington. We take a look at it from the standpoint of safety and security of our personnel. And then typically the Regional Bureau, Diplomatic Security, the Undersecretary for Management, and a few others look carefully at this, and then we make a judgment whether we concur with the post and the people should come out. And then we work with them to effect that departure. And in some cases we call it an authorized departure. People are allowed to choose whether they want to leave or not. In other cases, it's an ordered departure, and we may be telling our people you have to leave. I think terrorism is one very specific type of threat, and it's clearly caught a lot of people in very difficult circumstances and makes it difficult to operate in many countries. Civil disorder is another one, whether the government has the ability to continue to govern with rule of law, whether the security and safety forces are working. In many cases, if it's a coup d'etat or an internal revolution, these types of civil disorders can cause us to have problems, and that's a very direct security issue. Crime in many places around the world is a very serious issue. In some places, it's narco-terrorism that has got perhaps specific threats against some of our people in an embassy, or generally may cause a level of criminal conduct in a country that's just unacceptable for us to have families in. So we look at all of those types of things. Further, we look at things like counterintelligence threats or intelligence threats, and those are types of things that we look at. But those threats don't typically cause us to evacuate posts or pull our people out. We have different types of security programs that we put in place to address those types of threats. That's a really good question that I thrash with every single day. I think we're at a time where there's, in the aftermath of events in the Middle East, the growth of groups like ISIL, Al-Qaeda, Boko Haram, and some societies where law and order and civil governance has broken down, we have more posts around the world that we have higher levels of concerns about. What we try to do is understand each one of those environments and then craft the security programs so that we can continue to operate. Excuse me. I think many people like to say that the safety and security of our people is our highest priority in the Department of State. I'm going to just say that I quibble with that just the littlest bit. The reality is that our highest priority has to be fulfilling the goals of the United States government in terms of our foreign policy objectives overseas. Right behind that, I think, is the question of safety and security of our personnel. The fact is, if it's too dangerous for our people to be there, or too many of our people are harmed or injured, we can't fulfill those policy goals that we're there to do. But I think it's important to understand that, our job is to create an environment safe enough, oftentimes in very tough circumstances, that our officers can continue to fulfill their policy requirements and fulfill the foreign policy goals of the United States. That's one of the most difficult decisions that I think a U.S. ambassador and several of us that have the security responsibilities in the Department of State face. You are likely well aware that in the newspapers today there's a story that we evacuated the U.S. Embassy in Yemen last night, took our American employees out. Every one of those situations that we face is different. I can tell you that through the years, having faced quite a few of them, no one follows the next one, and it's exactly the same. It could be terrorism, it could be civil disorder, it could be infighting between the different groups. We have to judge what the security situation is. We're also looking very closely at what can we accomplish in the country. If it becomes apparent to a United States ambassador working with his Emergency Action Committee that we're not able to fulfill the diplomatic goals that we think we need to be able to do, and the risks are very high, the threats are very high, then oftentimes an ambassador will finally say, judging the risk-reward ratio, I can't fulfill what we're trying to do, and we're leaving our people in harm's way. Well, that's when you've got a question that the balance, we're very severely out of balance. And at that point, ambassadors will say we either need to lower our presence, get some of our people out, reinforce our presence, in some cases put more security personnel in, or in some cases say it's time for us to leave. And I think every ambassador ultimately knows that our job is to be there and to influence the events, try to implement things like good governance, rule of law, there's humanitarian programs, there's all these different things. But if we can't do it any longer effectively, and the threats are very high, most ambassadors will say, we've got to make some changes. And I say that goes all the way to sometimes withdrawing all of our personnel, which is what essentially happened in Yemen last night. I think every one of those is a different situation. I think every ambassador is really the person that ultimately has to start that process. Every ambassador is charged with the security responsibility for his personnel there. Everyone that I know, and I know virtually every ambassador we've got in the field at this point, every one of them takes that responsibility incredibly seriously. And where we have the greatest levels of security problems, where instability is the highest or terrorism threats are the highest, these ambassadors, I hate to say this, but I mean, security is almost the first thing they've got to think of when they wake up and the last thing they've got to think of before they go to bed. I counsel ambassadors now many times that are not in countries like that they're very fortunate that, when they wake up in the morning and go to bed at night, they ought to be thinking about what are the goals that we're trying to implement in this country? What are our bilateral relations? What's important to us to fulfill? And they've got an environment where they can pursue those things. And yet we're also in many places around the world where security questions are almost paramount. And an ambassador's got to judge every single day the risk to his personnel, sometimes to himself as well, versus fulfilling those goals. And regretfully, I think we've got more of those countries now than we've had in quite a while. We had some wounded. We had several officers that were not terribly wounded, but those attacks were terrible. In Nairobi, many more Kenyans were killed than American citizens. This is the type of question that, if you go all the way back to, well, I'll say shortly before 1980, when I think there was a much greater respect for the diplomatic process in many countries, where diplomats and the concept of diplomatic immunity was taken seriously, and immunities and privileges were respected by governments, and groups that maybe disagreed with us started to erode. And we saw the attack in Iran, and our embassy personnel were held for 444 days. I think that and a couple of assassinations of some of our ambassadors in the late 70s started people thinking, we've got new sets of issues that we have to thrash with. I think losing our embassy in Beirut, having it attacked twice, and then the Marine barracks in the early 80s, added a new level of complexity, and people began to understand that the world was changing. Diplomatic security, prior to that point, had been a bureau in the department, an office in the department, excuse me, and in 1985, at the recommendation of the Inman Committee, the Bureau of Diplomatic Security was born, and additional resources and additional thought within the department to the whole issue of security and how are we going to balance implementing our goals with security started to become a major question. We built about 20 new embassies because we recognized that our facilities were very vulnerable. From about 1988 to 1992, we built about 20 new embassies. And then I think as the Berlin Wall fell, as communism essentially ended, people really were looking for a peace dividend, and I think people were exceptionally hopeful that the world was going to become a different type of place. I think we were aware of what was happening with groups like Al-Qaeda earlier than most people in the United States, but clearly the bombings of Embassy Nairobi and Dar-es-Salaam in 1998 brought that picture crashingly home to us that we had issues. And then clearly the bombing of the World Trade Center. That was the watershed moment where I think everybody recognized that there was a new reality that we had to deal with. And we have spent, with the support of each administration and with the support of both parties on Congress, a considerable amount of time and effort and funding trying to ensure that we've got adequate and appropriate facilities for our people to work with. I think everybody wants to know that our diplomats overseas are working in reasonably safe environments, that we work our best to eliminate very highly vulnerable locations, that we put the right security programs in place. And I think we've made a great deal of progress. But despite quite a few new buildings and despite additional programs, the threats have continued to grow. And we can't guarantee the safety and security of our diplomats. What we can do is hit that right balance, because the threats are still there. Make sure that we've got smart, well-tailored programs to the threats out there, always keeping in mind that the goal is to enable our diplomats to perform the functions that they're there for. So I think sometimes there's discussions about whether our security is too heavy-handed, whether the embassies that we build have too much of a security emphasis in them. And I would say that we have almost a moral responsibility. I say it is a moral responsibility to ensure that the U.S. Embassy platforms that we're providing are safe and secure for our employees, not subject to things like the bombings in Nairobi and Dar-es-Salaam and Beirut. That we've got well-crafted security programs, and quite frankly, in places like Iraq and Afghanistan, they're going to be very, very heavy. Because unless we have those types of security programs, we're going to lose people. And in other places where the threats are much lighter, we have a much more open policy in terms of security and what we can do. But every embassy and every consulate has security programs now that we try to craft to the threat. And it's just the reality that we have to live with today. Benghazi was a tragedy. There is just no way that I can say anything other than the fact that the loss of Chris Stevens and 3 other officers in Benghazi was a failure. I think the security people were doing their best. I think there were diplomatic security agents out there that acted with incredible heroism, and I think there were security officers from other agencies that did their absolute best, as ours would have done, and ours did when they were in trouble. But I think the concept at that point, there was a belief that if we had a small enough presence, that we could fly underneath the radar. And I think that that belief and that I just think ultimately they got it wrong, proved wrong, and it was a tragic event. But I do want to say something about Benghazi. Chris Stevens, the U.S. ambassador there, was charged with the safety and security of his people and ultimately himself as well. And I think Chris was an incredibly intelligent ambassador, spoke the language fluently, understood the risks that he was running, and took those risks willingly. I've spoken with so many ambassadors since then, and every single one of them knows that in these situations, ultimately you have to make decisions. And Chris took those decisions because he thought our presence in eastern Libya, where the revolution had essentially started, was critical. And it was primarily Chris who drove our presence in Benghazi. I think the department supported that presence. I think that we missed some signals. I think the concept that we could keep a very small presence, keep a low number of security officers and stay under the radar was fatally tragic, or tragically fatal. But I think Chris was there for the right reasons. And I think, to say anything other is not to honor what he was trying to do and what he was trying to accomplish.